Welcome to another Talk Photography. I'm Mark Clegg for the Photographer Academy, and we're going to be joined any second by the amazing David Gilliver. Hit that webcam. We've practiced it, so we know it works. David, hi, you're there. Good evening, sir. Thanks for doing another Talk Photography with us. And I know the last one that you did was a couple of years ago, I think it was now, but thank you. You can still catch up with one of David's other webinars on the free section of the Academy site without any trouble and things really, so go and see that. David, welcome. We've had a pre-chat. It was great to have a little natter. For everybody else, can you kind of give us a kind of an idea how your world of photography began?
Yeah, hi Mark. Thanks for having me back again.
Pleasure.
Yeah, my journey into photography began well back at school, secondary school. I was lucky enough that my school had a darkroom, which was a rarity in the 90s, and it led on to me being accepted at the Glasgow School of Art because I was able to construct a portfolio and studied. I think back then in the mid 90s, it was the only art school in Britain that was teaching fine art photography as a degree. And that's where I ended up studying. Fell in love with macro photography during my time there and pioneered my little people style during those years. And then after art school, I moved to the island of Guernsey in the Channel Islands. Spent 15 years living there almost. And when I was there, I fell in love with light painting, and that's what this evening's all about. So that's, if you split my brain in half as a photographer, those are the two things: macro photography and light painting. That's kind of what comprises my creative output.
So the only experience I have is teaching my grandkids how to photograph their Lego figures with an iPhone and setting light to actually steal wool on a beach. That's the only experience I ever had of doing any form of light painting, except with obviously kind of flashes and everything else related things really. So yeah. David, as the world is so specialist for you, is it a business or is it a hobby? How does it work?
Yes, it's very much a business. So when I was in Guernsey during my time there, it was meant to be for 6 months actually, my stay there, but it turned into 14.5 years, a French wife and a baby girl. How time flies. But yeah, when I left Guernsey, I kind of made a pact with myself to, I was kind of at a crossroads when we moved back to live in Scotland, and I decided to go for it and launch my own art business, photography business. And it comprises of exhibiting in galleries around the world. That's how I make some of my income. I also teach regular workshops at a studio in Scotland. And I've written a couple of books that I sell through my website, stuff like that. So there's kind of various elements that kind of all pull together to kind of form my business.
And whereabouts in Scotland have you?
I'm right next to Glasgow in a small village called Gartcosh.
Okay, and you've been up there now for, and how long is it?
8 years, I think we've been back. I was born in Aberdeen. I've been in Scotland many years, but we moved back from the Channel Islands about 8 years ago.
You must have felt the temperature change from Guernsey to Glasgow.
My wife's from the south of France, so she certainly did.
And she still lives with you. That's you must be a special man.
Clinging on. Oh dear, yeah, that was a tough sell.
Brilliant. David, we're going to ask questions as they're coming through live from everybody anyway. We've got 8 amazing images that you're going to be talking about. Shall I hand you over the screen and then we can get on with tonight? I'll just make you the presenter.
Yep.
You should be seeing show my screen. And
yeah, I just clicked on it. Is anything happening?
I've got the go to webinar page coming up rather than anything else.
Oh, I clicked OK on it. I'm not sure what's gone wrong there. Do you want to try that again? Are you able to give it one more go?
I'll make myself the presenter first. Hang on a second. You can actually close that go to webinar web URL down if you want. Make presenter.
Yeah. Oh, hang on.
And then I'll give it back to you. We did practice this, guys, but we always have some glitches. Make the presenter.
Show my screen. There we go. Can you see my screen now?
Yep, I've still got that. There you go. We've got the images up now.
Excellent. There we go. Yeah, practice makes perfect, as they say. Second go lucky. So you can see a folder full of images, Mark?
I can, yep.
Do you want me to crack on?
Yes, please. Go ahead with the first image.
Excellent. Well, we're not going to just, because the screen share is working and so on, as I mentioned briefly earlier, Mark, I'm going to just run through a couple of intro images just to set the scene, if that's okay, and then we'll jump into the 8 images in question. Does that work?
Yep, brilliant. Brilliant. You'll take it away.
Lovely. Here we go. So, welcome everybody. Thanks for having me back. As I said, Mark, it's nice to be speaking to you all again. So this first folder, we're going to rattle through this at speed because it primarily contains images of light painting tools. Because over the years, I've been light painting for about 15 years now, thereabouts, 15, 16 years. And we're just going to look at some of the tools that I've used to create the images you're going to be looking at this evening. So this is just a very fleeting look at some of the light painting tools that feature in the images that I've created to work with. Fascinatingly, over the last 5 to 7 years, I would say, light painting has become so popularized, more and more people are light painting now, that light painters like myself have become full-time professional light painters and have started crafting their own tools. So more and more specialist light painting tools are kind of hitting the market each year that passes, which makes the whole landscape of light painting photography all the more exciting for people like myself. So here are just a kind of random collection of images of some of the tools that we will be talking about this evening.
And are these everyday tools? Are these everyday tools? Are they specialist photographic, except for the wire wool, of course? I know that one.
Exactly, yeah. Good time to ask as a whisk appears on my screen. Yes, some of the tools are not specifically light painting tools per se. They're just portable devices that illuminate, and of course, anything that you can carry that lights up can be used as a light painting tool. So some of them are a bit like that. You can just grab them on eBay or Amazon, but some of them, like this rather peculiar diagram or image, are more specialist, and I'll be talking about them as I go through the images tonight. Some of them are crafted by light painters specifically for the art of light painting. And so we'll discuss that more bespoke approach to light painting tools, as well as finding anything online that lights up that you can run around with in the dark. Because as I mentioned, anything you can carry that is portable and illuminates is your friend if you're into your light painting. But interestingly, like I say, over the last 5 or 7 years, light painters have started crafting a vast array of different light painting tools, and it's meant that for people like myself who do a lot of light painting in a professional capacity, we have way more tools to in our artillery than we would have done 5 or so years ago. Right, on with the show. We'll discuss image number 1, which is coming up just shortly. Okay, so this is a great image to start with, I always find, because it's my first ever light painting. And it all began through a more subtle approach to light painting, which is the image we're looking at right now. Because this is a light painting, it's just a very subtle form of light painting. So if you look at the sand in the foreground, the bottom right-hand side, can you see that kind of dappled light that's entering the scene? I'm kneeling just out of shot with a torch in my hand and kind of wafting it across the sand, holding it pretty low to the ground. And that's why you can see these wooden tiebreakers or beams in the sand. They've been slightly illuminated. So this is an example of light painting, but a far more subtle approach where I'm not actually entering the scene physically. I'm influencing the scene from out with the picture frame. But in my early days of light painting, or certainly being interested in long exposure photography, I encountered this image on Flickr, which was captured by a friend of mine called Simon in Guernsey. And I asked Simon what on earth I was looking at, because I sensed it was probably a light painting. And he didn't really give much away. He just gave me a few nods when I guessed rightly. And so I decided to do what any budding photographer does and grabbed a torch and headed back to the same scene that I knew he'd been at, because it's a very popular beach called Vazon on Guernsey. I headed back there with my little pen torch, as you can see. And in the dark, about an hour or so after the sun had set, I started to pass the torch around each of these pillars, these wooden pillars, with my hand, passing it from one hand to the other, whilst remaining, well, relatively invisible while stood behind each of the pillars. And of course, I was able to switch the torch on and off and move between each of the pillars during the exposure, which I think was about 5 minutes long. But I learned a really important lesson during this first light painting experience, because I had miscalculated the exposure length to be about 8 minutes long. And about 4 or 5 minutes into that exposure, it started to pour with rain. So I had to prematurely end the exposure and run back to my car because I was getting soaked. And the exposure was absolutely fine as is, as you can see. So because I was adding quite a lot of light to the image, that impacted on or affected the exposure length that I, as I say, had miscalculated. Because it's such an experimental form of photography, you know, there's a lot of kind of suck it and see moments where, or trial and error, where you might try something and realize you're just going off completely down the wrong path. And the beauty of digital photography, of course, is you can just go again almost immediately, because you can see the results on the back of your screen instantaneously after you've completed the shot. And that's, yeah, this is the beginning of my journey into light painting. I think that's what we should call this image. Do you have any questions about this one, Mark, before we move on?
Not yet. When you said it was kind of suck it and see, or kind of just getting going, is there a rule of thumb that you start an exposure with nowadays? So if somebody was going to go out and do a similar image to this, is it like a I know it depends on the time of night, so let's talk about then. Is it pitch black you're on about, or are we on about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, or is it twilight, or what? When's the perfect time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So over the years, I've kind of built up, well, obviously a kind of knowledge bank of information, but also my preferences in terms of conditions. My preferred conditions under which I normally go out light painting are anywhere between a half moon and a full moon, because I need that ambient light to illuminate and expose the landscape sufficiently. That's kind of part one. Part two, obviously, you need to keep a very close eye on the weather forecast, because rain and strong winds are a big no-no. And so weather and moonlight, and obviously tidal movements if you're walking near the sea, which I did a lot of when I was in Guernsey. And I guess the third thing I should mention that's kind of key is, and you learn this, you know, over time, is how to remain invisible during your light painting sessions. As I mentioned, for this particular example shot, I was physically stood behind each of the pillars, which meant I had to make sure that the camera quite literally couldn't see me sticking out the edges of the pillars, otherwise I would expose into the shot. But the other images I'm going to be showing you this evening, they're kind of free-floating light paintings, and they've been created by me walking through the scenes. And to achieve invisibility during your light painting sessions, there's kind of 3 golden rules. The first being you have to wear dark clothing, because you need to blend into the environment, the dark environment in which you're working, or relatively dark. Sometimes I will work under a full moon, but it's still relatively dark. The second is keep moving, okay? It's all about movement and light. If you stand still for too long, you will start to what's called ghost into the image. Your silhouette will begin to form. And so those are the 2 most important rules. The third one, which is a little bit trickier to teach, perhaps, is attempting to avoid illuminating yourself with the tool you're light painting with. So, for example, if you're using a lightsaber-like device, keep it held out in front of you, you know, away from your body. Don't hold it too close to your face, for example, because your face will start to expose. So those 3 rules, when combined, will virtually guarantee you being able to remain invisible. But in terms of the exposure times and the camera settings and that kind of thing, that comes with time and experience as well. But just for those that are listening, to give you a kind of happy, well, a kind of relatively happy middle ground, or a kind of a bracket in which I always find myself starting at when I go on a new light painting shoot, I tend to start around f5 thereabouts, so relatively wide aperture. I'll rarely go above ISO 100 or 200, because I don't want the camera to be overly sensitive to light. I want to be able to run a long exposure. And then the next kind of rule of thumb, once you've got your camera focused in the dark, which we can talk about again shortly, because I'm going to run through a very short tutorial next, I think. Once you've set your focal point, and it's always then time to run a test shot without any light painting. So just a test shot for the landscape itself, because that will then tell you how long your window of time is in which you're going to be working or attempting to create your light painting. So, for example, In the next shot, which we're going to jump into now, we may as well.